force, both foul and fair as a frozen cut to the heart, cold and clear.
I'm awake, so we have to play. Anna, I got you.
Elsa, what have you done? This is getting out of hand.
It was an accident. Sorry, Anna. She's our sculptor.
Okay.
Don't you remember I have powers?
It's for the best. Listen to me, Elsa. Your power will only grow.
Do you want to build a snowman? Or ride a bike around the halls? I think some company's overdue. I've started talking to the pictures on the walls. It's Coronation Day. It's Coronation Day. For the first time in forever, there'll be magic, there'll be fun. For the first time in forever, nothing's impossible.
Welcome back to the Film Box. If you're new here, pull up a seat because this is the kind of channel where we don't just watch movies. We take them apart, we look underneath. We find the things that were sitting right in front of you the whole time and we say, "Did you catch that? Did you really feel what that moment was trying to do to you?" That's what we do here. Every single time. And today we're cracking open a film that I genuinely believe is more complicated than it looks. A film that arrived with songs so loud, so infectious, so utterly inescapable that for a lot of people the music became the whole story. And that's a shame, because underneath all the glitter and the snowflakes, there is something real going on in this film, something worth sitting with. So let's slow down. Let's pay attention. Let's open this one properly, because Frozen deserves more than a sing along. It deserves a real conversation. Now, before we go anywhere, I want to set the table for what kind of box we are opening today. This isn't a dark box, it isn't a difficult one, but it is one of those films that has a fascinating split personality. On one side, an enormously entertaining animated musical built for families, and on the other side, a surprisingly emotional story about two sisters, about fear and self acceptance, about what it means to love someone so much you accidentally hurt them. When those two sides of the film are working together, it's genuinely beautiful, and when they're not, you can feel the tension. So today we're going to feel all of it, the magic and the messy parts, the songs that changed animation, and the story choices that still spark debate. Let's open it. Here's the thing about Frozen that most people never think about. The version of this film you watched, the one with Elsa as the misunderstood heroine, the one where true love turns out to be sisterhood rather than romance, the one where let it go becomes a moment of liberation rather than villainy. That version of this film almost didn't exist. The story that became Frozen went through such a radical transformation in the middle of production that what was once planned and what was actually released are almost two separate films wearing the same costume. And that detail, that one fact about how this film was remade from the inside out while it was being made, tells you everything about why certain parts feel so earned and why other parts feel slightly unresolved. Hold that thought, because we're going to come back to it. But first, let's go behind the lens. Let's understand how this box was built before we open it. Because knowing how a film was made changes what you see when you're watching it. That's the promise of the film box. You never just watch, you understand. The first thing you need to know is that Frozen had one of the most difficult and transformative production histories in modern Disney animation. The studio had been trying to adapt Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale The Snow Queen for decades, reportedly since the 1940s when Walt Disney himself expressed interest in it. The challenge was always the same. The original story was episodic. It lacked a compelling emotional center, and the Snow Queen herself was more of an icy antagonist than a character you could build an entire film around. For years, the project kept stalling. Different treatments, different approaches, different creative teams, and always the same fundamental problem. The Snow Queen wasn't someone audiences could connect with. She was powerful and remote and cold in every sense of the word. And then, reportedly around 2011, songwriters Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Nobes were brought in and everything changed because they wrote a song for the Snow Queen, a song in which this cold, remote, powerful woman stands on a mountain and lets go of every rule she was ever given. And when the directors heard that song, they reportedly looked at each other and said, "This character cannot be the villain. This is a protagonist. This is someone who is afraid of herself." And that realization restructured the entire film. Think about that the next time you watch Elsa. She is a character who was quite literally rescued from villainy by a song. And knowing that, you start to see the tension in how she's written. Because in many ways, she still feels like a character who was designed to be dangerous, now being carefully redirected toward vulnerability. That tension is visible on screen if you know where to look. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. The second production detail worth knowing is about the animation technology. Disney's FX team, according to various reports and interviews from the period, had to develop entirely new simulation software to handle the physics of snow and ice in this film. The challenge was that snow doesn't just sit there. It responds, it compresses, it sparkles, it behaves differently depending on temperature and movement and light. The team reportedly created and used a simulation system they nicknamed Matterhorn, which allowed them to animate individual snow particles with a level of physical accuracy that hadn't been done before in animation. And the payoff is visible in almost every frame of the film's second and third acts. When Elsa builds her ice palace, every surface has weight and geometry. When Anna trudges through deep snow, her steps sink in a way that feels real. The world of Arundel doesn't feel like a painted backdrop. It feels like a place with physics. That sense of tactile reality in a film about magic is part of what makes the emotional moments land so hard. Third, and this one is genuinely remarkable, Jennifer Lee, who co-directed the film alongside Chris Buck, became the first woman to direct a Walt Disney Animation Studios feature film with this project. That isn't just a footnote. It matters to the film itself. Because Lee also wrote the screenplay and the decision to reframe the story so that its emotional core is a relationship between two sisters and to ensure that the concept of true love in the climax has nothing to do with the prince, reflects a very specific creative authorship. The film is asking a question that animated films had almost never asked before. What if the great love story wasn't romantic? What if the most powerful bond in the film was between women who share blood and history and fear and warmth? That question is woven into every layer of the script, and knowing who asked it makes the film feel more intentional, more personal, and more radical than it might otherwise appear. Fourth, the casting of Idina Menzel as Elsa is more layered than it seems on the surface. Menzel had built her reputation on Broadway, most famously as Elphaba in Wicked, another character who is feared for power she cannot control, who is rejected and isolated, and who ultimately chooses to be who she is regardless of what the world thinks of her. The parallel is so close that some critics, when the film was released, pointed it out almost immediately, and reportedly the creative team was aware of this resonance. Casting Menzel wasn't just about finding a voice that could handle the technical demands of Let It Go, although that voice absolutely can in a way very few voices on earth could. It was about finding someone who embodied a very specific kind of outsider energy, someone who understood on a deep level what it feels like to be too much for the room you're standing in. That emotional authenticity lives in every note she sings. And fifth, the film was produced during a period when Disney animation was experiencing what many industry observers described as a genuine creative renaissance. Tangled in 2010 and Wreck-It Ralph in 2012 had both been critically and commercially successful, and the studio was regaining confidence after years of struggling in the shadow of Pixar. Reportedly, the creative leadership under John Lasseter at the time gave directors Buck and Lee significant latitude to rebuild the story during production, which is both why the film feels so emotionally ambitious and why certain structural elements feel slightly underdeveloped. The studio was willing to take risks, and sometimes risks leave fingerprints. But we'll get to that. Now let's open the box properly. Frozen was released in November 2013, directed by Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee, and produced by Walt Disney Animation Studios. The film is loosely, and I mean very loosely, inspired by The Snow Queen, a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen published in 1844. The cast is led by Kristen Bell as Anna, the warm and impulsive younger princess of Arendelle, and Idina Menzel as Elsa, her older sister, whose magical ability to generate ice and snow has made her both extraordinary and deeply afraid of herself. Josh Gad voices Olaf, a snowman brought to life by Elsa's magic, and Jonathan Groff voices Kristoff, a rugged ice harvester who becomes Anna's reluctant companion. The antagonist, and I'll say very little about this to protect the experience for anyone who hasn't seen it, is voiced by Santino Fontana. The music is by Christoph Beck, with songs written by Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez. The film runs approximately 102 minutes. At its heart, this is a story about fear, specifically about what happens when you love someone so much that your fear of hurting them becomes its own kind of weapon. It's also a story about sisterhood, about the gap that grows between two people who once shared everything and how that gap can be crossed. It asks whether the fairy tale idea of true love being the answer to everything is actually true, and it answers that question in a way that surprised almost everyone who was paying attention in 2013. Genre-wise, it sits at the intersection of musical, animated fantasy, and coming-of-age story, with a sharp comedic sensibility running through it that keeps the emotional weight from ever becoming too heavy. Before you watch it, should you? Yes, absolutely yes. Even if you've heard the songs more times than you can count, even if the cultural saturation of this film has made you feel like you already experienced it, you haven't experienced it as a film, as a story, as a piece of animated cinema that was made with genuine ambition and genuine care. It rewards attention. And now that enough time has passed since the cultural frenzy of its original release, you can actually watch it instead of just absorbing it, which is a very different thing. Now, let me tell you what it felt like to actually sit down and press play. When the film opens, you don't get Elsa, you don't get Anna, you don't get a princess or a palace or a song. What you get is men, working men, cutting enormous blocks of ice out of a frozen lake in the middle of the night, under a sky full of stars, singing a low, rhythmic work song about ice and its power. It is one of the most unexpectedly grounded openings in Disney history. There's no magic on screen, no glitter, just labor and cold and a specific kind of masculine physical world that the rest of the film almost entirely leaves behind. And in the middle of those men, you notice a small boy helping, working hard to prove himself. That boy is Christoph, and the choice to open this way, to ground the world before you fantasy it up, does something quiet and important. It tells you that this is a world where ice is real, where cold has weight, where what Elsa can do would mean something tangible and dangerous, not just visually spectacular. I walked into this film expecting a fairy tale, clean, bright, princess shaped, and in the first 10 minutes, I got something that felt more complicated than that. There's a beautiful innocence in the sequence where young Anna and young Elsa play together in a ballroom full of magically created snow. And then there's the moment that changes everything, an accident, an injury, and suddenly the film pivots from joy to guilt to silence. The palace gates close. Elsa begins to hide, and the space between the two sisters, this gulf that the whole film will eventually try to bridge, opens up without a word of explanation to the little girl on the other side of the door. Anna's confusion, her hurt, her endless tearful knocking, it broke something in me a little bit the first time I saw it. Because we've all been on one side of a closed door at some point, either the one who shut it or the one who stood outside it and didn't know why. That's the moment the film hooked me. Not the spectacle, not the songs, although those come soon enough and they're extraordinary. It was the door, the space between two people who love each other and can't reach each other. That is the emotional engine of this film, and everything else, the ice palace, the trolls, the snowman, the villain, the climax, everything flows from that one image. A sister alone in a room, knocking on a door that will not open, asking if her best friend wants to play, and the silence on the other side of it, simple, devastating, real. Once the film moves into its adult storyline and the two sisters are grown, there's a shift in visual and tonal register that feels almost jarring, but intentionally so. The kingdom of Arendelle is bright and bustling, the coronation is festive and colorful, and Anna's infectious optimism fills the screen with an energy that is genuinely funny and disarming. Kristen Bell's voiceover here is remarkable. There's a naturalness to it, a slightly breathless quality that makes Anna feel like a real young woman who has spent too long indoors and is barely containing her excitement at finally being let out. And then Elsa, contained, careful, terrified behind every placious smile. Idina Menzel does extraordinary work in these early scenes because she has almost nothing to work with. Elsa is hiding, and the performance has to show the hiding without showing what's being hidden. Every gesture is controlled. Every interaction is measured. You can feel the effort it costs her just to stand in the room with other people. And somewhere in that first act, before the storm breaks and before the music takes over completely, the film quietly tells you what it's really about. It's about the cost of suppression, about what happens to a person when they spend years being told that who they are is too much for the world to handle. Elsa isn't just afraid of her powers, she's afraid of herself. And that fear, not any external villain, not any magical curse, is the real antagonist of this story, at least for the first half of it. That's the box this film is. And we've only just begun to open it. So let's walk through this story. And I mean, really walk through it. Not the highlight reel version, not the greatest hits. Every beat, every turn, every moment that means something. Because Frozen is a film that moves fast on the surface, and if you let it carry you without paying attention, you'll reach the end feeling entertained but slightly unsatisfied, like a meal that tasted good but didn't fill you up. The way to fix that is to slow down, to notice what the film is doing underneath the fun, and there is a lot happening underneath the fun. So picture this moment. Arendelle is preparing for Elsa's coronation. The gates of the castle, those same gates that shut after the accident in childhood, the same gates that have defined both sisters' entire lives, are finally opening. For Anna, this is not just a celebration. This is the end of a long isolation she never fully understood. She bursts out into the kingdom with the kind of barely contained energy of someone who has been kept from the world for too long, and the film communicates this entirely through physical comedy and vocal performance. She nearly trips. She stares at everything. She smells things. She has a conversation with a horse that escalates in a direction no one expects. Kristen Bell plays this with such genuine warmth that you don't just find Anna funny, you root for her immediately and completely. She isn't embarrassing herself. She's just alive in a way that a castle full of quiet and closed doors never allowed her to be. And that contrast, the noise and color of the world outside against the silence she grew up in, makes you understand something that the film never directly states. Anna is lonely in a specific way, not just isolated from people in general. She is lonely for her sister. She always has been. Then she meets Hans, a prince from a neighboring kingdom, charming and attentive and immediately smitten, or apparently so. Their meeting is one of those movie moments designed to feel like magic, and the film executes it with enough physical comedy and musical shorthand that you buy into it in the moment, even as something in the back of your mind wonders why it's all happening so quickly. They share a song about finishing each other's sentences, about finding someone who completes the spaces in you. And by the end of the coronation evening, Anna has decided she's in love, and Hans has proposed, and she has said yes. The whole sequence takes about an hour of involved time. Anna moves to Elsa to ask for her blessing on the engagement. And this is where the film's first major rupture happens, not through violence or magic, but through a disagreement. Elsa refuses to bless the engagement. She tells Anna you cannot marry someone you just met. And Anna, who has been reaching for her sister across a decade of silence and closed doors and unanswered questions, pushes back. The argument escalates, and in one terrible moment of emotional overwhelm, Elsa loses control. In front of the entire court, ice shoots from her hands. The secret she has spent her whole life protecting is suddenly visible to everyone in the room. Now, here is what the film does brilliantly in this moment. It does not slow down to let the court react with wonder or curiosity. The reaction is fear, immediate, reflexive, unanimous fear, and not just fear of the power, fear of the person wielding it. The Duke of Weserton, a small, pompous, comic relief character who the film has been using for laughs up to this point, immediately calls Elsa a monster. Just like that, the funny little man drops his mask and becomes something uglier, and that transition is sharp and uncomfortable, and intentionally so, because the film is telling you something true about the world. Difference, when it's exposed without consent and without context, does not invite understanding. It invites fear, and fear in people who hold social power looks a lot like judgment. And judgment, when it comes from enough voices at once, sounds a lot like a verdict. Elsa runs. She leaves the castle, leaves the kingdom, leaves everything, and she runs into the mountains, and the film follows her, and now something absolutely extraordinary happens. The temperature of the entire film changes. Not literally, though that too. The visual palette shifts from the warm golden tones of the coronation into deep blues and purples and hard white light. The snowfall that follows Elsa up the mountain is not gentle, it's wild, it's responsive to her state of mind, and then she stops. She turns around and looks at the world below her, the kingdom she was supposed to inherit, the life she was supposed to lead, and she makes a decision not to return, not to fight, not to explain herself. She makes the decision to let all of it go. And what follows is one of the most significant 4 minutes in the history of Disney animation. Let it go. I am going to try to say something about this song that hasn't been said 1,000 times, which is a challenge because the cultural conversation around it is so enormous that it has almost swallowed the song itself. But let me try. What makes this song extraordinary as a piece of cinema, not just as a song, not just as a vocal performance, but as a piece of film, is the architecture of what it does to the story. Before this song, Elsa is a character defined entirely by what she is not allowed to do and who she is not allowed to be. Every scene she has been in has been about restraint, about containing, about managing and hiding and presenting a face that doesn't match the interior. And this song is the first time in the film, and arguably the first time in Elsa's entire remembered life, that she does what she actually wants to do. Without apology, without strategy, without an audience she has to protect. She builds the palace because she can. She creates beauty because she is full of it, and she has never been allowed to let it out. She walks out onto that ice balcony in a new dress she made out of her own nature, and she looks at the world, and the word she speaks is free. And here is what most people miss about that moment. Elsa's freedom in this song is real. It is genuine and earned and emotionally true, but it is also incomplete because what she is letting go of is not just the fear and the suppression. She is also letting go of Anna. She is letting go of responsibility and connection and love. She says quite explicitly that she doesn't care anymore what people think and that solitude is her new kingdom, and there is something in that which is not triumph. There is something in it which is loss. The song is written so perfectly on this knife's edge. It sounds like pure liberation, but it contains inside it the seed of a new problem. Elsa isn't healed by reaching the top of that mountain. She's just alone in a different way. A way that feels better because it's on her own terms, but alone nonetheless. And the film knows this. The film is watching her with love and with worry at the same time. And that true register, that simultaneous celebration and unease, is what makes the song so emotionally resonant and so thematically precise. It isn't just a banner. It is a character study compressed into 4 minutes of animation and music. Back in Arendelle, winter has arrived in the middle of summer. The coronation guests are stranded. The kingdom is freezing. Hans is trying to manage the crisis and keep people calm. And Anna, who has just watched her sister flee and her kingdom ice over and her entire world turn sideways, Anna makes a decision that is almost recklessly brave. She is going to find Elsa. She is going to bring her sister home. She gives Hans authority over the kingdom in her absence, saddles a horse, and rides into the mountain alone. And this is the moment where I want to pause and say something about Anna as a character, because I think she gets underestimated in conversations about this film, because she is funny and warm and a little chaotic, and the film allows us to enjoy those qualities so much that it's easy to miss the actual depth of what she is doing throughout the story. Anna never stops believing in her sister, not when Elsa spent years refusing to open her door. Not when Elsa accidentally exposed her magic in public. Not when Elsa's power created a kingdom-wide emergency. Anna's response to all of it is not anger. It's not judgment. It's a suitcase and a horse and a decision to go find her sister and say, whatever happened, whatever you are, whatever you did, I'm coming. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinary kind of love, the kind that moves toward the thing that other people are moving away from. And the film doesn't make a big speech about this. It just shows your girl on a horse riding into a blizzard. But if you're watching closely, you already understand exactly what that girl is. Her journey into the mountains brings her into contact with Kristoff and his reindeer Sven, who she essentially commandeers through a combination of shopping leverage and determined cheerfulness. Kristoff is everything Anna is not: guarded, practical, deeply skeptical of other people's feelings, and absolutely convinced that she is going to get herself killed. He agrees to take her to the North Mountain primarily because she bought him supplies and he wants to be paid, and the dynamic between them is set up immediately as a comedic contrast that will slowly warm into something more. But here is what I love about how the film handles Kristoff. He is not a romantic hero. He is not charming in the traditional Disney prince way. He is a bit rough, a bit odd. He talks to his reindeer in two different voices, conducting both sides of the conversation himself, because his reindeer is his best friend, and the reindeer cannot speak, and the film gives this to you completely straight without mocking it. Kristoff is a person who finds human connection difficult and animal connection easy, and he has organized his whole life accordingly. And there is more emotional honesty in that detail than in 100 conventional romance setups. They encounter a talking snowman in the forest, Olaf, and here is where I need to be honest about something. Because Olaf is simultaneously one of the film's most effective comedic tools and one of its most structurally complicated choices, is Elsa's creation, built unconsciously, apparently from the memory of the snowman she and Anna made together as children. He carries inside him, without knowing it, the emotional residue of their relationship before everything went wrong. He wants to experience summer. He has no idea what heat would do to a snowman, and the film uses this brilliantly for a recurring joke that builds into a genuinely moving moment late in the story. But early on, Olaf functions as comic relief, and whether you find him delightful or whether you find him slightly too much depends almost entirely on your tolerance for a very specific kind of animated sincerity. He believes things with his whole chest that are objectively absurd, and the film loves him for it, and I mostly do too. But I understand the people who need a breath when he's on screen. I want to note both things because both things are true. The group finds Elsa's ice palace. And the palace, let me spend a moment here because it deserves one. The design of the palace is staggering. It is not just beautiful, it is characterologically precise. Every surface is sharp and angular and cold and translucent. It looks like what a person who has spent their entire life learning to be untouchable would build as their home. It has no soft corners. It has no warmth in any material sense. It is technically breathtaking and completely uninhabitable as a human space. And that is the point. Elsa has created freedom, and her freedom looks like this: vast and crystalline and utterly alone. The production design team understood what the creative team needed this space to say, and they delivered it in a way that works on every level simultaneously. Anna climbs to the palace. She reaches her sister. And the reunion scene, which should be one of the most emotionally releasing moments in the film, is instead one of its most painful ones. Because Elsa does not want to be found, not by Anna, not by anyone. She is not ready. She has just found a version of herself that doesn't feel like a threat. And Anna's arrival immediately reactivates all the fear because Anna represents the world, and the world is what Elsa has just escaped. She tells Anna to go home. She says she cannot come back with her. She says it isn't safe. And Anna, who has climbed a mountain in a blizzard to reach her, refuses to leave without at least trying. They argue again and again in the middle of the emotional overwhelm. Elsa's magic responds to her feelings before she can stop it. She strikes Anna accidentally, not with her hands this time, but with eyes directly into her heart. A wound that is invisible, a wound that is already beginning to work. Anna doesn't tell Kristoff immediately how badly she's hurt. She doesn't want to alarm him. She pushes through it. And this is another quiet piece of characterization that deserves attention. Anna's instinct, even when she is the one who is suffering, is to manage the situation so the people around her don't have to worry. She has spent years being cheerful in a house full of closed doors. She knows how to absorb pain without showing it. It has become, in a very human way, one of her coping mechanisms. And watching that play out now in a physical context, where the hidden pain is literal and magical and potentially fatal, gives the emotional dynamic a new layer of urgency. The group encounters Christoph's family, the trolls who raised him. And the troll sequence is, I'll say it plainly, the most structurally awkward part of the film. We'll come back to that in detail when we get to the criticism section. But what it does accomplish, despite its tonal messiness, is two things. First, it establishes that the ice wound in Anna's heart can only be healed by an act of true love, and that because the wound went to her heart rather than her head, it cannot be reversed by Elsa's magic. Second, it sends Anna back toward Hans, because everyone assumes that the act of true love required is a kiss from the man she is engaged to. And this assumption, shared by every character in the film, including Anna herself, is the thing the entire final act is built around disrupting. Back in Arendelle, Hans has been doing something interesting in Anna's absence. He has been, by all observable standards, excellent. He has been organizing relief efforts for the Frozen Kingdom, housing the coronation guests, keeping the peace, maintaining authority. He appears to be exactly what a prince should be in a crisis. And the film lets you believe this for a long time. It is generous in letting you believe it. It does not place obvious villain signifiers on him. It doesn't sneer when no one is looking. He doesn't make suspicious asides to a shadowy companion. He is simply good at being a prince. And that is, when you think about it, the most chilling thing about him. Because when the mask comes off, the competence does not go away. What goes away is the care, and those are very different things. Meanwhile, Elsa is captured by the Duke of Weselton's men and brought back to Arendelle in chains. Not because Hans wants to do things this way. He reportedly tried to negotiate her return peacefully, but because fear has its own momentum in a crowd and the people of Arendelle are cold and frightened and need someone to blame, Elsa is put in a cell in iron chains that are specifically designed to keep her hands apart so she cannot use her powers. And the image of that, a woman in chains specifically because of who she is, in a cell in what was supposed to be her own kingdom, is not subtle. The film doesn't try to make it subtle. It wants you to feel the horror of it. It wants you to sit with the specific cruelty of being imprisoned by the very people you were supposed to lead. Anna returns to the castle. She goes to Hans. She asks for the true love's kiss, and Hans, slowly, quietly, without rage, without any of the conventional villain theatrics, tells her no. He tells her that she was never more than a means to an end. He explains his plan with the calm efficiency of someone who has already moved on to the next step. He blows out the candle in the fireplace, and he leaves her there to freeze. This scene is extraordinary for what it refuses to do. There is no speech, no monologue of evil, no moment where Hans cackles or reveals some hidden cruelty. He is just done. He has what he needs. She is no longer useful. And the clinical absence of emotion in that moment is more frightening than any amount of theatrical villainy would have been. It is the performance of a person who was never really there in the first place. Anna is freezing. The curse from Elsa's magic is spreading through her heart. Olaf finds her and keeps her warm with a candle flame and delivers his most important scene in the film, the one that makes all the committee earn its keep. He tells Anna what love is. He describes what love looks like in real, observable behavior, in the way someone puts someone else's needs above their own, in the way you would stay in an uncomfortable place because leaving would hurt the person you love. And the film is, in this moment, redefining the emotional vocabulary it has been using for the whole story. It is saying love is not a feeling that happens to you in a magical instant. Love is a choice. Love is an action. It is what you do rather than what you feel. And this small snowman, standing next to a dying girl melting slowly by a candle flame, is the character who articulates this most clearly. I want you to hold that thought, because it is the axis the entire ending rotates on. Elsa escapes from her cell. This is happening because her emotional state is again overwhelming her control. She cannot contain her grief and fear, and the ice she generates breaks the chains and the walls and carries her out onto the frozen fjord. Hans pursues her. He reaches her. He tells her in cold, calculated detail everything that has already happened, that Anna is dead, that she died because of Elsa's power, that Elsa has now lost the only person who ever tried to reach her. He's lying about Anna being dead, but Elsa doesn't know that, and the effect on her is immediate and complete. She stops moving, she stops fighting, she collapses inward, and in that moment of absolute grief, the blizzard she has been unconsciously generating, the winter storm that has covered the entire kingdom, suddenly stops. The snow hangs in the air, motionless. The world holds its breath, and this is the moment the box opens completely. Anna, who has been escorted out onto the fjord by Christoph, who has turned back to find her because he cannot leave her to die, whatever his reservations, Anna sees two things at the same time. She sees Christoph coming toward her, and she sees Hans raising his sword to strike Elsa from behind, and she has seconds left. The curse is consuming her. She is turning to ice, 1 degree at a time. And she has to choose. She can move toward Christoph, toward what might save her life, or she can move toward her sister, toward what will certainly end it. She chooses Elsa. She steps between the sword and the sister. She raises her hand, and she freezes solid at the exact moment Hans's sword comes down. His blade shatters against her crystallized arm. The force of the impact sends him flying, and then there is silence on the frozen fjord. Complete silence, and Elsa reaches out and touches her sister's frozen form and says her name, and there is so much grief in that one word. And then, slowly, warmth returns, a glow from inside the eyes. Because Anna's final act was an act of true love, not a kiss, not a feeling, a sacrifice, the willingness to die rather than let her sister be hurt. And that selfless act is what the film has been building its entire definition of love toward, not the feeling you get when you meet someone perfect, the choice you make when your own survival is on the line and you put someone else's first. Anna returns. Elsa understands. The warmth of her sister's love does what no magic could. It shows Elsa that love, not fear, is what she was made of all along. And she realizes that she can control her powers not by suppressing them in terror, but by releasing them in love. The winter breaks. Arendelle thaws. The sun comes back, and the two sisters stand together on a fjord that is no longer frozen, and for the first time in years, neither of them is behind a door. That is the story. That is the box. And it is beautiful, even knowing every beat, even having seen it more times than I can count. The emotional logic of that final sequence lands every single time I watch it, because it earns it. Everything the film built was pointing here. Every closed door, every unanswered knock, every moment of one sister reaching toward another who was too afraid to reach back, it all paid off in a girl stepping in front of a sword. Now let's talk about what this film does with absolute brilliance, because there is a great deal to admire here and I want to be specific about it. The voice acting in Frozen is, across the board, exceptional, but there are two performances that operate on a level above the rest, and they deserve to be named clearly. Idina Menzel's work as Elsa is one of the great achievements in animated film performance. The challenge she faced is almost impossible to articulate simply. She had to play a character who is experiencing enormous internal turbulence while presenting almost complete external stillness for most of the film. She had to communicate suppression and effort and fear through her voice alone, in a medium where the face is animated separately by someone else. And she does it. There is a moment in the coronation scene, right before Elsa's powers are exposed, where a very small, very controlled shift in Menzel's vocal quality tells you that the internal cost of the performance Elsa is putting on is becoming unbearable. It is subtle, it is devastatingly precise. And then let it go arrives, and everything that was contained in those small, precise moments explodes outward in one of the most technically and emotionally demanding vocal performances in Disney animation history. The way she beats the song, starting almost whispered, gaining confidence with every phrase, arriving at the final notes with something that sounds genuinely like a person taking their first real breath. That arc is not just musical. It is psychological. She is singing the inner life of a character who has just discovered she has won. Kristen Bell's Anna is the other essential performance, and in some ways the more technically difficult one, because Anna is almost never still, almost never quiet, and the performance has to maintain emotional authenticity through constant comedic movement and physical comedy that Belle has no direct control over. What Belle does brilliantly is root every scene in genuine feeling rather than joke delivery. When Anna is funny, it is because she is real, not because she is performing. Her voice has a kind of breathless sincerity that makes even the most absurd lines land with emotional weight. And the scene where Hans explains that he doesn't love her, Belle's reaction in that moment, the small silence before comprehension arrives, the way confusion becomes hurt before hurt has fully formed, that is acting. That is a performer understanding not just the line but the precise moment before the line, when the character still doesn't know what they're about to know. The specific scene I want to call out as the single most powerful acting moment in the film is the reunion at the Ice Palace, not Let It Go, which is spectacular and gets all the attention it deserves. The reunion, when Anna finally reaches Elsa, there is a moment where Elsa's face, seen in close up, cycles through something like hope. Just a flicker of it, just the recognition of her sister's face after years of separation, and then immediately closes it off again, replaces it with the careful blankness of a person who has trained themselves not to feel anything they can't control. And Menzel plays that internal shutdown in her voice in a way that is heartbreaking, precisely because you can hear both things happening at once, the wanting and the refusing. It is the performance of a lifetime compressed into 30 seconds. Now let's talk about story construction, because Frozen does several things with structure that are genuinely clever and worth unpacking. The most important is the inversion of the fairy tale paradigm. Disney films had spent decades establishing the grammar of romantic love as the resolution to all problems, the kiss that breaks the spell, the prince who arrives at the final moment, the love story as the engine of the entire narrative. Frozen sets up all of those conventions with complete fidelity in its first half. It gives you the prince, the romantic song, the engagement, the quest with a new male companion. It assembles every piece of the conventional fairy tale architecture, and then it systematically, deliberately dismantles it. The prince is the villain. The romanticist cannot save anyone. The male companion is loving but incapable of doing what only a sister can do. The act of true love is a sacrifice between women, not a kiss between lovers. This is not subversion for its own sake. It is not the film being cynical about love or romance. It is the film making a very specific argument about what love actually is. And it makes that argument by first constructing the thing it wants to argue against with total conviction and apparent sincerity. That is sophisticated storytelling. That takes craft. The film's direction, shared between Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee, handles the tonal range of the material with remarkable steadiness. This is a film that has to move between broad comedy and genuine grief within the same sequence, sometimes within the same scene, without the emotional register collapsing under the contradiction. And it manages it. The way the Kristoff Anna relationship develops has a warmth to it that never oversells itself. There are no manufactured moments of forced chemistry, just a growing practical respect that softens gradually into something more. The way Elsa is framed visually changes across the film. Early scenes use tight shots and constrained angles that communicate entrapment, while the Ice Palace sequence uses enormous sweeping camera movements that are almost disorienting in their expansiveness. The visual language is doing character work. That is direction. That is the difference between a director who knows how to frame a shot and one who knows what a frame needs to say. The animation itself, And I mentioned this in the context of the snow simulation technology, but I want to come back to it as an aesthetic choice, has a tactile quality that is unusual in animated film. The textures in Frozen feel like they would have weight if you could touch them. The ice, the snow, the fabrics, the surfaces, everything has a physicality that grounds the fantasy in something your body recognizes. And that grounding matters more than it might seem because it is what makes the emotional extremity of the story feel real rather than theatrical. When Anna freezes solid, the effect doesn't look like a Disney special effect. It looks like something terrible happening to a real person. The physicality of the animation makes that moment unbearable in the best possible way. The music, let's give it the space it deserves. The Lopez and Anderson Lopez's score is one of the finest in animated film history, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it simply because Let It Go became a cultural phenomenon. I say it because the songs in this film are, almost without exception, doing structural narrative work rather than existing as decorative set pieces. For the first time in Forever tells you everything you need to know about Anna's emotional state and desire in under 4 minutes, her longing, her hope, her romantic idealism, her hunger for connection, and it does this while simultaneously sketching Elsa's fear and dread through a counter melody. Two characters, two complete emotional states, two verses of the same song occupying the same space at the same time. That is compositional mastery. Love is an Open Door does something sneakier. It is designed to sound like a genuine Disney love duet. All the hallmarks of the genre are there, and it works perfectly as that. And it also, on second viewing, sounds completely different because you know who Hans actually is. Almost every line in the song has two meanings. The surface meaning is charming and romantic. The subtext is manipulative and strategic. That dual register is not accidental, it was engineered, and the craftsmanship of that engineering is extraordinary. Do you want to build a snowman, which I have not yet spoken about directly, and which I have been saving because it deserves a dedicated moment, is perhaps the most emotionally concentrated piece of music in the entire film. It tracks the entire arc of Anna and Elsa's separation across years, across seasons, across a series of unanswered knocks on a closed door. It begins with a small child's voice, bright and hopeful, asking if her sister wants to play. It ends with a young woman's voice, still hopeful but quieter now, worn down by years of not understanding why she is alone, singing softly to a door that has never opened. And somewhere in the middle, the parents leave for a sea voyage and don't come back. The film does not dramatize the parents' deaths, it gives you Anna's voice, and then the door, and then silence. And that silence, that gap where a sound should be, is one of the most devastating editorial choices in a film full of them. And in summer, Olaf's song, which could have been mere comic interlude, turns out on reflection to be something more interesting. Olaf dreams of warmth while living in a cold world. You want something that would literally destroy him if he got it. And the film plays this entirely for laughs in the moment. But the underlying idea that wanting something real and beautiful can be dangerous, that the things we dream of sometimes can't exist in the same world as who we are, that is a theme the film is exploring everywhere. In Elsa's story, in Anna's story, and in this small snowman summer fantasy. Even the comedy is doing thematic work. Now let me talk about what Christoph Beck does with the score underneath the songs. Because the musical score, as distinct from the songs themselves, is often what I notice most on repeat viewings, and it is exceptional in ways that are easy to miss. Beck uses a musical motif tied to the idea of Elsa's magic, a soft, crystalline sound signature that first appears when young Elsa plays with her powers in the opening sequence. This motif reappears throughout the film, evolving as Elsa's relationship with her power evolves. In the early childhood scenes, it sounds like wonder. In the scenes of Elsa's suppression, it appears in a compressed, almost smothered form, as if the music itself is trying not to take up space. In the Ice Palace sequence, it expands into something enormous and architectural. And in the film's resolution, when Elsa finally controls her powers through love rather than fear, the motif returns to its original quality wonder, clean and clear without the fear underneath it. That is emotional storytelling through musical architecture. That is a composer who understood not just the film's plot, but its psychological journey. Let me tell you about the one scene I find completely and utterly unforgettable in this film. Not Let It Go, though that is extraordinary. Not the frozen fjord climax, though that is devastating. The scene I keep coming back to is much quieter, and it comes near the end, after Anna thaws. Elsa is holding her sister, and she says gently that she knows what she needs to do. She raises her hands, and summer comes, the snow lifts, the heartache clears, the ice palace on the mountain dissolves, gently like something that was never meant to last forever. And Elsa doesn't look at the palace as it goes, she looks at her sister. She has traded her solitude for connection, and she does it without regret, without theatrics, without a single word of explanation, just a choice made quietly in the direction of love. The simplicity of that choice, after everything the film has put both characters through, is the moment I feel the film most completely. It is the answer to the first image of the film, the closed door and the unanswered knock. Love chose to open. Now, because this is the film box and we open things fully, not selectively, let's be honest about where this film falls short. Because it does fall short in specific places, and those places matter, and they are part of why my personal rating sits at 7.2 rather than somewhere higher. Let me be precise about this. The trolls sequence. I mentioned this earlier and promised to return to it, and here we are. The trolls in this film. Kristoff's adoptive family, the little round rock creatures who raised him, are introduced in a scene that has a warmth and a quiet emotional logic to it. Fine. But the sequence late in the film where they attempt to marry Kristoff and Anna while Anna is literally ill and has not consented to any of this. This sequence is, by almost any analysis, the weakest in the film. The comedy doesn't land cleanly. The musical number Fixer Upper is catchy in isolation but disrupts the narrative momentum at exactly the moment a film should be accelerating toward its climax. And more critically, the sequence makes a structural error. It introduces the idea that what Anna and Christoph have is a real emotional connection worth celebrating. But the film hasn't quite done the work to earn that yet. We understand Anna's feelings for Christoph better than the film has shown us. Christoph's for her. So the tro's matchmaking reads as premature at best, tonally confused at worst. It feels like a sequence that survived from an earlier draft of the film that was less interested in the sister relationship as the primary emotional story. And its awkwardness is a fingerprint of the production history we talked about earlier of a film that was rebuilt from the inside during production and didn't always seal the seams perfectly. The second criticism is related to Hans, and this is a more complicated one because I want to be fair about it. The Hans twist, the revelation that he is the film's villain, is dramatically effective in the moment. It is surprising, it is cold, it is well executed, and it serves the film's thematic argument about the difference between the performance of love and love itself. But here is the problem. When you go back and watch the film a second time, looking for the seeds of Hans's villainy, the hints that something is wrong, the cracks in the performance, the moments where the mask slips just enough for an attentive viewer to notice, they are almost entirely absent. And that is a craft problem. A great narrative twist should survive second viewing. It should be the kind of thing where, knowing the answer, you go back and say, oh, it was right there. I should have seen it. Hansel's twist is the kind of thing where, knowing the answer, you go back and say, I see some slightly awkward line readings and one close up that lingers a bit too long. The film earned the surprise, but it didn't earn the retrospective inevitability. It feels on second viewing like a twist that was inserted rather than one that was always baked in, and that is a screenwriting shortcoming that the film's other strengths largely cover but which a careful viewer will notice. Third, Elsa's character arc in the second half of the film. After Let It Go, Elsa essentially disappears from the story for a significant stretch. She is in her palace, she is captured, she is in a cell, she is on the fjord. In all of these situations, things are happening to her rather than her making active choices that drive the story. Her agency, which was so pleasant and so thrilling in the mountain sequence, is largely removed for the second half of the film, and she becomes a problem to be solved rather than a character making decisions. And this is frustrating because the film is ostensibly about her as much as it is about Anna, and you feel the imbalance in how the story resolves itself. Elsa's transformation from fear to love happens because she is told something by a villain rather than because she reaches that understanding herself. Hans tells her Anna is dead. That false information is what breaks her. And then the truth that Anna is alive and chose to sacrifice herself for Elsa reverses it. Elsa's emotional journey in the third act is driven almost entirely by information management rather than internal growth. And for a character as rich and as fascinatingly drawn as Elsa, that is a missed opportunity of real magnitude. Fourth, and this is a pacing observation rather than a structural criticism, the comedy in this film occasionally steps on moments that need to breathe. Olaf specifically is deployed in scenes of genuine emotional weight, in ways that deflate the tension before it fully forms. The scene in the dungeon where he explains love to Anna is an exception. That scene earns both the comedy and the emotion simultaneously. But there are other moments, particularly around Elsa's capture, where a joke lands and disperses feeling that the story needed to accumulate. Comedy in dramatic films is an extraordinarily difficult instrument to use well, and Frozen is not consistent in its use of it. Fifth, the kingdom of Arendelle itself is given very little texture as a world. We know it has a fjord. We know it has a castle. We know it has a market square that looks charming and Scandinavian inspired. But the kingdom has no history that we feel, no political depth, no sense of the ordinary lives of the people who live in it. When the kingdom freezes, we are told it is a crisis, but we don't feel the crisis through the eyes of the people experiencing it because we have no meaningful relationship with those people. The stakes of the winter feel somewhat abstract as a result. Compare this to, say, a film like Beauty and the Beast, where the village and its inhabitants have specific personalities that make the world feel inhabited. Arendelle is a backdrop, a beautiful one, but a backdrop nonetheless. Sixth, and finally, the relationship between Anna and Christoph, while charming, is somewhat underwritten in terms of its emotional development. The film gestures at that connection building through shared experience, but the specific moments of genuine emotional intimacy between them are few. Their almost kiss near the end of the film is meant to feel like the culmination of a developing relationship, but it is slightly hard to pinpoint exactly when that relationship became something more than pragmatic cooperation. The chemistry is there in Belle and Graf's performances. There are moments of genuine warmth between these two characters. But the screenplay doesn't always connect those moments into a coherent arc. It trusts the charm to do work that the structure needs to be doing, and most of the time the charm is enough. But occasionally you can feel the gap. None of these criticisms, and I want to be clear about this, undermine the film's genuine achievements. What Frozen does well, it does extraordinarily well. Its emotional core is real and true. Its centered performances are outstanding. Its music is a genuine artistic achievement. Its thematic argument about love and sacrifice is delivered with craft and conviction. But these are the places where the film asks you to accept something that doesn't quite hold together under pressure. And a film this ambitious deserves honest engagement with the places where it fell slightly short of what it was reaching for. That is what it means to open a box properly. You look at everything inside it, the beautiful parts and the complicated parts, the things that catch the light and the things that don't. Now let's step back from the film itself for a moment and think about the world it landed in. Because a film doesn't exist in a vacuum, it arrives at a specific moment in time, with a specific cultural weather around it and the way people receive it. The way critics respond, the way audiences react, the way it gets absorbed into the conversation, all of that tells you something important about both the film and the moment. And with Frozen, the relationship between the film and its cultural moment is one of the most fascinating stories in modern cinema. Not just because of how big it became, but because of how unexpected that size was and what it revealed about what people were hungry for and didn't know they needed. November 2000. Let's place ourselves there. In animation broadly, this was a period of genuine creative diversity and experimentation. Pixar had been the dominant creative force in animated film for nearly 2 decades, and while the studio was still producing quality work, there were conversations happening in the industry about whether Pixar's particular brand of emotionally sophisticated, technically brilliant storytelling had reached a kind of plateau. Films like Cars 2 had received criticism suggesting that even the greatest studios can coast on reputation. Meanwhile, DreamWorks Animation had its own rhythm of hits and misses, and smaller studios were producing interesting work that often went unseen. Disney Animation specifically had been working hard to reclaim its identity after a long period where the studio felt like it was chasing Pixar's aesthetic rather than finding its own. Tangled had been a significant step forward. Wreck-It Ralph had proved that Disney could do sophisticated meta-commentary, but neither had quite become a cultural event in the way that the Disney Renaissance films of the 1990s had been. In live-action cinema, 2013 was a year dominated by franchise filmmaking. Sequels, prequels, expanded universes. The year's biggest films included Iron Man 3, Thor: The Dark World, The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, Man of Steel, and Fast and Furious 6. The cultural appetite was for scale and serialization, stories that continued, universes that expanded. The idea of a standalone, complete, original animated musical that told a finite story about two sisters, that was almost counterintuitive as a commercial proposition in that particular moment, and yet Frozen opened in late November 2013 to strong but not extraordinary reviews and solid but not immediately record-breaking box office. In its first weekend, it performed well, but it was only when it continued performing week after week after week, sustained by word of mouth and by something that is almost impossible to manufacture in the film industry, which is genuine audience love, that it became clear something unusual was happening. By the time it left theaters, it had grossed over $1.2 billion worldwide, at the time making it the highest grossing animated film of all time, surpassing Toy Story 3. It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature and Best Original Song. And Let It Go entered the culture in a way that very few pieces of music from any medium do, not just heard but inhabited, performed, argued about, parodied, embraced, and occasionally despised by people who had heard it one too many times. Here is what I find genuinely interesting about the critical reception. The initial reviews were warm but measured. Critics praised the animation, the voice work, the songs, and the emotional core, while noting some of the structural issues we discussed in the previous section. The consensus was roughly, this is a very good animated film with some exceptional elements and some rough edges. A 4-star film. An A-, a film worth seeing, particularly for families. Not quite a masterpiece, not the film that would change everything. That was the critical consensus in November and December of 2013. And then something happened in the audience response that the critics hadn't fully anticipated. Parents who had seen the film with their children started going back to see it again, sometimes without their children. Others who were not the film's target demographic were buying tickets. The conversation was not just about the songs, it was about the sister relationship, about the emotional honesty of the suppression narrative, about the specific way the film turned the fairy tale formula inside out. People were telling each other about this film with a kind of urgency that went beyond entertainment recommendation. They were saying you need to see this because it meant something, because it says something true. And that kind of urgency, spreading person to person rather than being driven by marketing or critical consensus, is the most powerful engine of success in cinema. The critical re-evaluation happened gradually, and then all at once. As the film's cultural footprint grew, writers and critics began to take a closer look at what it was actually doing thematically and structurally. Analyses emerged. Think pieces were written. The reading of Elsa's story as a narrative of queerness and self acceptance, of a person hiding their true nature from the world out of fear of rejection, then discovering that who they are is not a curse but a gift, gained significant traction in academic and critical writing. The film never explicitly addresses sexual identity. It doesn't need to. But the emotional grammar of Elsa's arc, the hiding, the shame, the moment of public exposure, and the consequences of it, the eventual liberation, maps with extraordinary precision onto the lived experience of LGBTQ individuals navigating a world that has told them, directly or indirectly, that who they are needs to be kept behind closed doors. The film didn't set out to be a queer allegory, or at least there is no confirmed record of the creative team explicitly framing it as such. But the emotional truth of that reading is there in the film, and it resonated deeply with a very large number of people who saw their own experience in Elsa's story. And the fact that the creative team, and Jennifer Lee specifically, was willing to engage with that reading rather than dismiss it, speaks to the film's genuine generosity of spirit. The divergence between critics and audiences was most visible in one specific area. Olaf critical consensus broadly found him a mixed success, effective in his best scenes, somewhat intrusive in others. Audience response, particularly from children and from adults with a high tolerance for sincere animated comedy, was almost universally enthusiastic. Olaf became the most meme, most costume, most commercially reproduced element of the film. He was on every piece of merchandise. Children wanted to be him for Halloween. His particular brand of cheerful, guileless wisdom, the idea that the most warm hearted character in the story is literally made of cold, connected with people in a way that transcended the question of whether he works narratively. Whether that gap between critical response and popular love tells you something about critical distance from popular taste, or tells you something about the limits of Olaf's integration into the story, or both, is genuinely interesting to sit with. The awards conversation around Frozen was substantial, but I would argue slightly incomplete in what it recognized. The Academy Award for Best Animated Feature was well deserved and essentially uncontested that year. No other animated film came close to what Frozen had achieved in terms of both quality and impact. Let It Go winning Best Original Song was similarly appropriate. But the film received no nominations in any of the craft categories. No nomination for Best Cinematography Equivalent, no nomination for Sound Design, no recognition of the extraordinary technical achievement that the snow simulation represented. This was not unusual for animated films, which are systematically underrepresented in the major craft categories at the Academy Awards. A systemic bias in how the institution values animated work that deserves more discussion than it typically gets. But it meant that the film's genuinely groundbreaking technical achievements were recognized primarily within the animation industry rather than in the broader cinematic conversation. Which is a shame, because what the effects team did with snow and ice in this film would have been remarkable work in any medium. The film's streaming life has been equally remarkable as its theatrical run. With the launch of Disney Plus in 2019, Frozen became one of the platform's anchor titles, one of the films that drove subscriptions and justified the platform's value proposition to new subscribers. The second wave of discovery that streaming enables is real and significant for this film. There is now an entire cohort of viewers who experience Frozen for the first time, not in a theater with an audience but on a laptop or a television screen, alone or with family, pausing it when they needed to and rewinding the moments they wanted to feel again. And interestingly, the critical consensus around the film has continued to warm over time. The rough edges that reviewers noted in 2013 seem less prominent now, possibly because the passage of time allows you to see the whole shape of the film rather than evaluating it against the expectations of the cultural moment it arrived in. Does Frozen feel timeless? This is a question I think about seriously because the film's relationship with its own cultural moment is both a strength and a potential limitation. On the one hand, the emotional story it tells, sisterhood, self-acceptance, the nature of love, the cost of suppression, is not bound to any particular historical moment. These are permanent human experiences. The themes of Frozen will be recognizable and relevant in 50 years for the same reason they were recognizable and relevant in 2013, because they describe something true about what it is to be a person in the world. On the other hand, the specific cultural conversation that the film entered, the discourse around representation in children's media, the debate about the fairy tale romance paradigm, the particular resonance of a character who hides her nature from the world, these are conversations that belong to a specific cultural moment. They have evolved since 2013. The film was radical for its time in certain ways. Some of what felt radical then is now more standard. And the film that felt like a revelation in 2013 may feel, to a viewer experiencing it for the first time in 2026, less surprising than its reputation suggests. But here is what I believe: a film doesn't need to remain surprising to remain great. The best films are the ones that keep delivering something true on every viewing, even when you know every beat, even when the surprises have become familiar, even when the cultural moment that gave the film its original charge has moved on. And Frozen at its best in those scenes of genuine emotional precision, in the sister relationship, in the film's quiet refusal to let romantic love have the final word, delivers something true. That is not a property of a specific cultural moment. That is the property of the work itself. Now let's go deeper. Let's talk about what Frozen is actually about underneath the snow and the songs and the fairy tale architecture. Because there is a film beneath the film here and I want to pull it out into the light. On the surface, Frozen is about a magical winter and a princess quest and a villain reveal. Those are the plot mechanics. But beneath those mechanics, the film is exploring something much more universal and much more personal. It is exploring what happens to a person, to a self, under chronic suppression, and it is asking whether the solution to suppression is isolation or connection. Whether freedom means removing yourself from the world that hurt you, or finding a way to exist in that world as who you actually are. Elsa's story is the story of a gifted person who was told very early in her life that her gift was a danger, not intentionally cruel. Her parents' intentions were protective, not malicious. But the impact of their protective strategy, hide everything, feel nothing, keep the world at a distance, was the gradual erasure of Elsa's sense of self. By the time she is crowned queen, she has become so expert at hiding that she has almost lost access to who she is underneath the hiding. The irony, and the film is very aware of this irony, is that suppression didn't make Elsa safe. It made her unstable. The harder she tried not to feel, the more powerfully the feelings pushed back when they finally broke through, which is exactly what happens in the coronation scene. It is not a random loss of control. It is the inevitable consequence of years of pressure that was never going to be sustainable. And let it go, which I want to return to one more time from this angle, is not ultimately the solution to Elsa's problem. It feels like a solution. It sounds like a solution. It is staged and shot and lit like a solution. But what Elsa does on that mountain is trade one form of isolation for another. Before, she was isolated inside a palace, hidden from the world. After, she is isolated on a mountain, hidden from the world. The form is different, the feeling is different. The ice palace is beautiful and the castle was constraining, but the fundamental condition, aloneness, has not changed. What Elsa discovers at the mountain is not freedom, it is relief. And relief and freedom are not the same thing. Real freedom, the film eventually argues, requires other people. It requires the willingness to be seen by someone you love and to stay in the room while they see you. Anna's story from this angle is equally fascinating. Anna is a character defined by her optimism, her relentless, almost unreasonable belief that everything is going to be okay, that people are fundamentally good, that love is real and possible and worth running toward even when the evidence is mixed. And the film initially seems to be setting up that optimism as naivety, as a flaw to be corrected by the education of experience. Hans is the lesson. Hans is what happens when you trust too fast and love before you know someone. That is the obvious feeling. But the film ultimately does something more interesting than that. It doesn't tell Anna to love less or trust less or want less. It tells her to love better, to understand that love is not a feeling that arises in a song with a stranger who finishes your sentences. Love is what you do when you are already afraid, already hurting, already running out of time. Love is the choice you make when every instinct is telling you to save yourself and you reach toward someone else instead. Anna's optimism isn't the problem in this film. It is eventually shown to be exactly correct, just aimed in the wrong direction at the beginning, and this is where the film makes its deepest argument, the one I find most moving when I sit with it. The film is arguing that love is not a state. It is not a feeling you catch like a cold or a lucky break. It is a practice, a discipline, a series of choices made over and over in the direction of another person. Elsa practices love when she agrees to return to the world rather than stay in her beautiful palace. Anna practices love when she steps in front of a sword. Christoph practices love when he turns his sled around in the middle of a blizzard because he can't leave someone to die. Olaf practices love when he stays beside a dying girl and melts by candle flame. Every significant act in the climax of this film is an act of chosen love, not feeling, choice. And the film is saying something genuinely radical. Not radical for its genre, but radical for what we tell ourselves about love as a culture. It is saying that the thing we call love, the thing we build stories and songs and whole lives around, is not something that happens to us. It is something we do. Think about the door at the beginning of the film. Anya knocking, Elsa silent on the other side, terrified to open it because the last time she reached toward her sister, she hurt her. The film opens on that door and closes on its absence. Two sisters on a fjord with no walls between them, choosing each other in full knowledge of what they are. That is the journey from the first image to the last, from a closed door to an open world. And every minute of this film is about the distance between those two images and what it costs to cross it. There is something else I want to name here, something the film does with parents that I find genuinely unusual in children's cinema. The king and queen of Arundel are not villains. They are not cruel or negligent or indifferent. They are afraid. They love their daughters intensely, and they are afraid of what Elsa's power might mean, and their fear leads them to a strategy: hide it, contain it, manage it, that produces exactly the harm they were trying to prevent. The film doesn't condemn them for this. It doesn't offer a speech about how wrong they were. It simply shows you the consequence of their well intentioned fear and lets you feel the sadness of it. Because this is true. This is something that happens in real families in the real world. Parents who love their children deeply and completely, whose love is genuine and not in question, and whose fear of a specific part of who their child is leads them, without intending it, to communicate to that child that who they are needs to be hidden. The harm doesn't require malice. It requires only fear and the best intentions, and Frozen shows this with a clarity and a compassion that I find genuinely striking for a film marketed primarily to children. The Troll family, Kristoff's adoptive family, makes an interesting thematic contrast here. The trolls are imperfect parents in their own way. Their intervention in the film's third act is, as I noted, structurally clumsy. But their fundamental approach to Kristoff is one of radical acceptance. They took in a human child, raised him as their own, and apparently never asked him to be something he wasn't. Kristoff is odd. He talks to reindeer in two voices. He is socially awkward and emotionally guarded, and the trolls love him through all of it, enthusiastically and without reservation. The contrast between the two families, Elsa's parents, who loved her and tried to minimize who she was, and Kristoff's trolls, who loved him and maximized who he was, is not accidental. The film is exploring different models of love in every relationship it shows you, and it reaches the same conclusion every time. The love that heals is the love that sees clearly and stays anyway. The Hans question, from this thematic angle, is also worth exploring carefully. Hans represents love as performance. He is extraordinary at looking like love. Attentive, warm, supportive, charming, everything you would want. He knows every gesture and every line. He built his career on watching, learning, reflecting back to people what they most want to see. And because Anna was starved for connection, he could give her just enough of the appearance of love to satisfy the hunger temporarily. But there was never anything underneath the performance. No actual care, no actual interest in who Anna was as a person, just a very sophisticated calculation in the costume of feeling. And the horror of that, the specific horror of discovering that someone you thought loved you was performing the entire time, is something a lot of people who have loved and been hurt by someone like Hans will recognize in their bones. The film doesn't lecture you about this, it shows it to you and lets the cold of it land and trust you to feel it. Now connect all of these threads to your own life for a moment, because this is where the film stops being about animation and starts being about you. How many of us have spent time hiding something real about ourselves? A feeling, a fear, a quality, an identity, because we learned early on that the world or someone important in our world might not handle it well. How many of us have stood on the other side of a closed door, knocking, wondering why someone we love won't let us in? How many of us have mistaken the performance of love for the real thing, drawn to someone who reflected a hunger back at us, dressed in the language of feeling? And how many of us have had the experience of being truly, plainly, fully seen by another person and feeling in that moment like the most frightening and the most liberating thing in the world? Frozen is a children's film. It has songs and snowmen and a talking reindeer. And it is also, in its best moments, a film about the central human terror of being fully known and the central human need for it. That is the box inside the box. And now we are going to open the innermost one completely. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you want to experience it fresh. Still here? Good, because this is where it gets really interesting. Let's go through the film's biggest revelations with clear eyes, and let me show you some things that are easy to miss even on multiple viewings. The Hans twist. Let me work through it carefully, because I think the discussion of it usually skips too quickly to whether it worked and doesn't spend enough time on how it was constructed and what was slightly missing from that construction. From his first scene, Hans is presented as a perfect match for Anna. He is warm, funny, self-aware about the performative absurdity of fairy tale romance, and apparently interested in Anna as a specific person rather than just a princess. Their meeting scene is engineered to be charming, and it succeeds. The song they share at the coronation is, as I mentioned, a masterpiece of dual register writing. Every line works as genuine romantic expression on the surface and as strategic manipulation in retrospect. The specific lines where Hans talks about finally finding his place, about the feeling of completing something on second viewing, these lines have a transactional quality that the musical setting of the first viewing disguises completely. He is not describing the feeling of falling in love. He is describing the feeling of achieving a goal. But here is the specific moment in the film that, on second viewing, functions most clearly as a flag that something is wrong with Hans, and which most viewers overlook because the film doesn't draw attention to it. When Hans is managing the crisis in Arendelle during Anna's absence, there is a moment where the Duke of Weselton presses him for information about what is to be done about Elsa. And Hans's response, measured, careful, politically precise, contains a very specific quality of control. He doesn't speak from feeling, he speaks from strategy. Every word is calculated, and the film shows you this briefly in close-up. A slight stillness in his expression, a quality of assessment behind the warmth. It lasts only a moment, and then the warmth returns and the scene moves on. That is the closest the film comes to putting a crack in the mask before the revelation scene. It is subtle to the point of almost not there, and I think the film could have done this 3 or 4 times, given us those brief windows into the calculation underneath, and the twist would have been both surprising and, in retrospect, inevitable. Instead of just surprising, the Duke of Weselton deserves a separate paragraph because his function in the film is more interesting than he initially appears. He is a comic villain, small, pompous, focused on trade agreements and personal image. He gets the broad laughs. He falls over in dance sequences. He is positioned to look like the antagonist for most of the first act, which serves the larger twist by directing the audience's antagonist identification away from Hans. But the Duke also represents something specific. He is the embodiment of fear as policy. When Elsa's power is revealed, his immediate response is not curiosity, not concern, not an attempt at understanding. It is the demand for elimination. The monster must be destroyed. And the language he uses, the word monster, is not accidental. He is the voice of the mob, the community's fear given articulate form. And the film is careful to make him buffoonish rather than genuinely frightening. Because if the Duke were more menacing, the audience might focus on him as the film's real danger, rather than understanding that the real danger, Hans has been standing next to Anna the whole time. Let's talk about the hidden details and pieces of foreshadowing that changed the film on second viewing. There are several that are worth naming specifically. The first is in the gloves. Elsa wears gloves throughout the film's first act. They are part of her containment strategy, a physical reminder to herself to hold everything in. When she removes them during the coronation, when the fight with Anna causes her to strip them off, the film has set up this visual vocabulary so precisely that the removal of the gloves functions as a legible visual sign of loss of control. But here is the detail that most people miss. Look at the gloves themselves in the early scenes. Look at how Elsa handles them. The precision, the ritual, the particular care. She puts them on and takes them off with the same deliberate intention that someone might use for a ceremony. The gloves are not just practical, they are psychological armor. They are the physical practice of suppression. And when they come off in the coronation scene, violently, as part of a moment of emotional overwhelm, the visual meaning is complete. The armor broke, the wall broke. Everything she has been keeping out is now in the room. The second hidden detail is in the ice palace itself. If you look carefully at the palace's design, and I mentioned the sharpness and the angularity of it earlier, there is something specific about the staircase leading to the main entrance. It is wide, extravagant, built for an audience. Elsa builds this palace alone in the middle of a mountain with no one to see it, and yet she builds a grand staircase. She builds something designed to be seen by others, even in the moment she believes she is permanently alone. The film doesn't comment on this, it just shows it to you. But it says something important about what Elsa actually wants versus what she tells herself she wants. She says she doesn't need anyone. She builds a palace with a grand entrance. Those two things are not the same story. And the film is watching her with love and with sadness, knowing that even in her moment of greatest isolation, she is still making room for someone to arrive. The third detail is in the way Olaf is introduced. When Elsa builds the ice palace, she creates Olaf without apparent awareness. He simply emerges from her magic as she builds, shaped like the snowman she and Anna made as children. She doesn't name him, she doesn't acknowledge him as a creation. He simply arrives, and the film moves on. But this means that Elsa, in her moment of greatest declared independence from her past and from Anna, unconsciously recreated the symbol of their childhood bond. She couldn't let it go. She literally physically could not let go of the image of her sister, the snowman she and Anna made in that magical midnight ballroom, the one that stood for everything they had before the accident. That is what comes out of her when she stops trying to control her powers. Not ice weapons, not sharp geometry, a snowman made of memory and love. The film is showing you who Elsa actually is underneath the fear. And she is showing you in the same moment that she is telling you she doesn't care anymore. The fourth detail is one of the most emotionally precise pieces of foreshadowing I have ever seen in animated film, and it comes in the form of a song. Do you want to build a snowman? I want to go through it methodically, because every verse of this song is doing something specific. The first verse is Anna as a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, outside Elsa's door. She is bright. She is hopeful. She suggests games, activities, references to their shared world. She doesn't understand why Elsa won't open the door. She knocks and waits and asks again and then finally gives up for now. The second verse is Anna, perhaps a year or two older. The hope is the same, but the phrasing is different. She tells Elsa she's been trying not to be demanding, that she understands if Elsa needs space, but that she just really misses her. There is something slightly heard in the second verse that wasn't in the first. Not bitter, not angry. Just gently, honestly, I miss you. The third verse is Anna as a young woman. Their parents have died. She's standing outside Elsa's door talking to it because talking to the door is the closest she can get to Elsa, and she would rather talk to a door than have no connection at all. She jokes about the portraits on the walls, she reads a book, she pretends for a moment that the distance between her and her sister can be managed with humor and activity. And then her voice catches, just barely, and she says she wants Elsa to know that she's there, that whatever Elsa needs, she's right outside the door. There is no song in Disney history, and I've thought about this carefully, that compresses more emotional information into 3 verses. Every repetition of the title phrase, "Do you want to build a snowman?" accumulates weight with each verse. In the first verse, it's an invitation. In the second verse, it's a reaching out. In the third verse, it's a lifeline torn across a gulf that has become so wide it is almost impossible to see across. And the snowman itself, the image they share from the magical night before everything went wrong, is not just a game. It is the symbol of who they were before. Anna is asking every time whether this sister she remembers is still in there, whether the relationship they had, the midnight snow and the laughter and the falling asleep together after a long game, is still real, whether the door is ever going to open. The film answers that question in the climax with a sacrifice on a frozen fjord. But you need to have felt every verse of that song to fully understand what is being answered. Now let's talk about the climax itself in detail. Because the final 15 minutes of Frozen are densely layered and move very quickly, and there are choices happening here that deserve to be unpacked. Anna is freezing. The curse from Elsa's magical strike is spreading from her heart outward. Olaf has found her in the library, where Hans left her to die, and is keeping her warm by the fire, and their conversation there is the emotional heart of the film's entire third act. Olaf talks about love, and specifically he talks about what love looks like in behavior, the way someone will put themselves in an uncomfortable situation for the sake of another person. He describes Kristoff turning back through a blizzard. He describes it as love without using the word very often, which makes it land harder. And then he says something extraordinary, something that the film positions as almost throwaway comedy, but which is in fact the thesis statement of the entire narrative. He says he doesn't know much, but he knows that the people who love you want you to be happy even if it means they won't be happy themselves. That kind of love, he says, is everything. He is a snowman who is staying next to a fire because the person he loves needs warmth. He is melting, he is demonstrating in literal physical terms the principle he is describing. That is the film's central argument made visible. Love as sacrifice. Love as the willingness to do something of yourself in the direction of someone else's life. Meanwhile, outside, Elsa has escaped her cell. The escape itself is worth noting. She breaks free because her emotional state becomes uncontrollable. The grief of being imprisoned in her own kingdom, the weight of knowing she has hurt everyone she loves, the crushing irony of being chained in the place she was supposed to rule, it breaks whatever remains of her suppression. And in breaking through the chains and the walls, the storm she has been unconsciously generating, the eternal winter over Arendelle, intensifies dramatically. The blizzard on the fjord becomes a whiteout. The boat carrying the fjord's inhabitants rocks. The world has not thawed simply because Elsa was captured. The winter was never about Elsa's decision to leave. It was about Elsa's emotional state, and her emotional state in a dungeon cell is, if anything, worse. Kristoff, who has been watching the storm intensify from a distance, makes a decision. He turns back. The reindeer Sven is the catalyst for this. There is a beautiful moment where Sven communicates through entirely non-verbal animal acting, the suggestion that perhaps leaving was not the right choice, and Kristoff, who has been trying to talk himself into continuing to leave, finally gives in to what he already knows. He rides back toward Arendelle. And this detail, this moment of Sven nudging Kristoff toward Anna, is thematically precise. The film has spent 90 minutes building the idea that love is a choice, not a feeling. And here it shows you a choice being made. Kristoff doesn't have a dramatic realization. He doesn't suddenly understand that he loves Anna through some magical epiphany. He turns back because leaving feels wrong and because someone is going to die if he doesn't. That is love in its most practical, most honest form. It isn't poetic. It isn't a speech. It is a sled turning around in a blizzard. Because where else would you go? On the fjord, everything converges. Elsa is on the ice. Hans is approaching her. Anna has been brought out to the fjord on a horse, barely conscious, directed toward Kristoff, who is coming back for her. The geometry of the scene is exact. Anna can reach Kristoff in time. She can make it to him before she freezes completely. All she has to do is keep moving in his direction. And then she looks to her left, and she sees Hans behind her sister, sword raised, about to strike. The choice Anna makes in this moment is the clearest possible demonstration of the film's thesis. She is not going to survive this choice. She knows she is not going to survive it. The cold is already at her extremities, already claiming her. She has perhaps seconds left before the curse takes her completely, and she turns away from Kristoff, away from her own survival, and runs toward her sister. An image of Anna running across a frozen fjord, arm raised, her body turning to ice as she runs, is one of the great images in Disney animation. Because you can see the choice being made in real time, you can see the life leaving her. And you can see her make peace with it, because the alternative is unacceptable. Hans' sword shatters against Anna's frozen form. The impact sends him spinning across the ice, and he wakes up on his back, staring at a frozen statue of the girl he murdered, and something in his face in that moment, very briefly, is almost unreadable. The film doesn't give him remorse exactly, but there is something there, a pause, a reckoning with a consequence he perhaps had not fully modeled, and then it passes, and he is on his feet, looking at Elsa, whose collapse into grief at the sight of her frozen sister has stopped the storm completely, and he prepares to deliver his final blow. But the thaw has already started. The warmth is already moving outward from inside the ice because Anna's act has done what all the other magic could not. It has answered the film's central question about what true love actually is, with a definitive and irreversible action. And when Anna comes back, she comes back gasping, warm, alive, and immediately looking for Elsa. There is no theatrical moment of comprehension, no slow dawning of the realization. Anna is back, and she knows why, and so does Elsa. They look at each other across the frozen fjord, and everything that has been building for the entire film, every closed door, every unanswered knock, every year of distance and fear and longing is in this moment of recognition. Without a word of explanation, Elsa understands. She has been loved fully and unconditionally by someone who chose to die rather than lose her. That is the act of love. That teaches her what she has always needed to know. Not that her powers are beautiful, that she is loved, that the love around her is real. And that love, not the suppression of fear, not the isolation of the ice palace, not the performance that people like Hans are so expert at, but this love, specific and costly and freely given, is what she is made of. Hans is punched off a boat by Anna, is played for laughs, and it lands that way, and it is the exact right tonal note. Because the film has just given you something devastating and true, and now it needs to breathe, and the satisfying physical comedy of Hans getting exactly what he deserves delivers that breath perfectly. The film understands its own emotional architecture well enough to know when to let the audience release. Elsa realizes she can control her powers through love rather than fear. And here I want to spend a moment on the visual and thematic precision of what this means. The film has given us two models of Elsa's power throughout. The model of suppression, where the power is locked away, contained, and then bursts through uncontrollably when the suppression fails. And the model of expression, where the power moves freely but without direction, creating beauty but also chaos. What love gives her is a third model, not suppression, not uncontrolled expression, directed creation. She raises her hands over the frozen fjord and consciously, deliberately brings summer. Every flake of snow has her intention in it. Every degree of warmth is a choice she is making. The chaos of the eternal winter, which was the externalization of her internal chaos, resolves into order not because she suppresses herself, but because she has been given for the first time a reason to want the world to be warm. Her sister is alive. Her sister chose her. The world is worth warming. The imagery here is worth studying. The warm sunlight that breaks through the clouds as Elsa leaves the winter is not just weather. It is the visual answer to the film's opening scene. Men harvesting ice from a frozen lake under cold starlight. The film opened in cold and dark in a world defined by ice in a space where Elsa's power was a commodity being extracted and traded. It closes in warmth and light, in a world where that same power is a gift being freely given. The arc from darkness to light is the arc of the entire story, and it is completed not by Elsa becoming less powerful, but by her becoming fully, freely, lovingly herself. The resolution of the Christoph and Anna relationship is handled with real charm. He almost asks her if he can kiss her and then retreats from it, which is exactly right. Because the film has spent 90 minutes teaching us that love is not a feeling that demands expression in a moment of emotional peak. Love is patient. Love is the turning of the sled. Love is the fact that he came back. Anna kisses him, and it is warm and funny and completely without the grandiosity of a fairy tale conclusion, which is exactly how it should be. Olaf gets a flurry of snow from Elsa that keeps him cool in the summer warmth. This tiny detail, which gets a laugh and moves on quickly, is thematically significant in a way the film barely pauses to note. Elsa gives Olaf the ability to exist in the world as he is, a snowman who wants summer, who can now have summer because someone figured out how to make it possible for him. She found a way. That's what love does in this film, again and again. It finds a way to make space for the person it loves to exist fully, to be who they are without having to choose between their nature and their happiness. Hans is sent back to his kingdom in disgrace. The Duke of Whistleton is cut off from trade with Arendelle. And Elsa, in her final moments in the film, does something that I want to slow down and appreciate. She opens the gates of the castle, the gates that have been closed since her childhood, the gates that define both sisters' entire lives, that separated Anna from the world, that separated Elsa from Anna, that kept the castle as a space of managed isolation rather than living connection. She opens them, and the people of Arendelle pour in, and Elsa stands in the middle of them, no gloves, no performance, no strategy, and creates ice for them to skate on. She is present in the world fully as who she is, surrounded by people she is giving something to, and no one is afraid because the fear has thawed along with the winter. There is no post-credit scene in Frozen, which I mention only because people sometimes look for one. The film ends where it should, with the sisters and the open gates and the warmth. That is the complete image, nothing more is needed. My personal reaction to the ending on first viewing, and I want to be honest about this rather than merely analytical, was something like relief. Not just the emotional satisfaction of a story resolving the way you hoped it would. Actual relief. Because the film had spent a significant amount of its runtime in states of suppression and fear and isolation, and the release from those states, the warmth, the open gates, the sisters together, felt genuinely earned rather than simply pleasurable. When a film makes you feel something in your chest that resembles what the characters are feeling in the scene, that is the measure of its success. And in that final sequence, as Arendelle fills with summer and the gates stand open and Elsa skates free, I felt what Anna feels. The end of a very long wait. The arrival of something that was always possible and just needed the right moment and the right sacrifice to come true. That is the complete box. That is Frozen open fully. Every layer, every detail, every hidden thing pulled into the light. And I hope you see it differently now. Not just as the film that made Let It Go inescapable for a decade, but as a story about a door, about the choice to open it, about what it costs, and what arrives on the other side. So, where does all of that leave us? Where does this film land when you strip away the cultural noise and the merchandise and the years of Let It Go playing in every shopping mall and every school talent show and every car with a child in the back seat? Where does it land when you look at it clearly as a piece of cinema, as a story about human beings, animated human beings? Yes, but human beings nonetheless, trying to find their way back to each other across a distance that fear created. It lands at a 7.2 out of 10 for me. And I want to explain exactly what that number means because I think it says something true about this film that a simple recommendation wouldn't capture. A 7.2 is not a small number. In my personal rating system, anything above 7 represents a film that I believe does something genuine, something that matters, something that earns its place in the conversation. A 7.2 is a film I would recommend without hesitation, a film I return to, a film whose best moments I think about when I think about what cinema can do at its finest. But it is also a number that carries inside it the honest acknowledgement that this film did not fully become what it had the potential to become. It reached for something extraordinary and it grasped it in places with both hands, and in other places the reach fell slightly short. And that gap between what Frozen is and what Frozen could have been at its most ambitious, that gap is exactly the size of a 7.2. Not a disappointment, a film that earned genuine admiration and genuine respect, and which I hold to a high standard precisely because I know what it was capable of. The 7.2 acknowledges Idina Menzel's vocal performance as one of the great achievements in animated voice acting. It acknowledges the Lopez and Anderson Lopez songs as a genuine artistic landmark in the history of the movie musical. It acknowledges the sister relationship as the most emotionally honest thing Disney animation had done in decades, and the twist on the true love paradigm as a piece of thematic storytelling that was both surprising and true. It acknowledges the snow simulation, the ice palace design, the visual language of the direction, the emotional precision of Do You Want to Build a Snowman, and the complete devastation of Anna's sacrifice on the frozen fjord. And it also holds honest space for the underdeveloped second half of Elsa's character arc, for the tonal messiness of the troll sequence, for the slightly underwritten Kristoff and Anna relationship, for the Hans twist that surprised beautifully in the moment but doesn't quite sustain retrospective scrutiny, for a kingdom of Arendelle that is gorgeous to look at and largely hollow as a world to inhabit. These are real limitations. They are the fingerprints of a film that was remade during production and did not always seal the cracks perfectly. They do not undo what the film achieves, but they are part of the complete picture. And at the film box, we give you the complete picture, always. Now, who should watch this film? If you are someone who has ever felt that who you are was too much for the world you were living in, too loud, too emotional, too gifted, too different, too hard to explain, you should watch this film. Because Elsa's story will meet you where you are. It will not give you easy answers. It will not tell you that liberation is simple or that the world will always respond well to your authenticity. But it will tell you that the cost of hiding is higher than the cost of being seen. And it will tell you that with enormous emotional specificity and craft. If you are someone who has a sister or a brother or any person in your life who you love completely and from whom you have become separated by time, by distance, by fear, by a conversation that went wrong, you should watch this film. Because the sister relationship in Frozen is not a fairy tale version of sisterhood. It is specific and complicated and damaged and deep and absolutely worth fighting through a blizzard for. And the film understands that. It turns every moment of the reunion. If you are a parent, you should watch this film. Not for the princess story, for the quiet, devastating portrait of parents who loved their child and got the method wrong. The film has something important and gentle to say about the gap between loving someone and knowing how to love them well. And it says it without judgment, which is the most generous and the most truthful way to say it. If you love animation as a craft, If you care about what is actually possible in the medium, about what skilled artists and technicians and performers can create together, you should watch this film. The snow simulation alone is worth the viewing. The ice palace sequence alone is worth the viewing. The complete achievement of Let It Go as a 4-minute piece of cinema, music, animation, performance, and thematic precision working together with total alignment, that is worth the viewing. Who might not connect with it? I would be honest here too, because this film is not for everyone, and pretending otherwise does a disservice both to the film and to the people who might find it underwhelming. If you come to this film as someone primarily interested in tight, propulsive narrative construction, if you want a story that moves with no loose joints and no rough edges, where every structural choice is fully earned, and the villain is as well built as the heroes, you may find certain elements of Frozen frustrating. The hands twist, the troll sequence, the relative passivity of Elsa in the second half. These are genuine structural issues that a viewer with a strong preference for clean narrative craft will notice and feel. If you are deeply fatigued by the cultural saturation of this film, if Let It Go has become, through sheer repetition, something you are unable to hear neutrally, then I would suggest waiting before watching it again. Give it enough time that the songs can become new again, that you can encounter them as the film intended them rather than through the filter of 1,000 cover versions and parodies and memes. The film deserves to be experienced fresh, and if you can't experience it fresh yet, wait until you can. It will reward that patience. And if you are someone who finds animated musicals resistant to emotional engagement, who maintains a critical distance from the form that prevents the sentiment from reaching you, this film may not fully break through. It has enough wit and structural intelligence to offer something to a resistant viewer, but its deepest achievements are emotional ones, and they require a degree of willingness to be moved. If you are not willing, the film cannot do its best work on you. How should you watch it? If you have children in your life, watch it with them. Not because it is a children's film and therefore only valuable in that context, but because watching this film with a child and seeing them react to it, seeing the moment when Elsa's power is exposed and they lean forward, seeing the moment of Anna's sacrifice and the expression on a small face that is trying to understand what just happened, that is an experience that adds a layer to the film that solo viewing cannot provide. The intergenerational charge of this story, the way it speaks simultaneously to the child who wants to build a snowman and to the adult who remembers being that child, is one of its genuine gifts. If you are watching alone, watch it on the largest screen available to you, with the volume up. The film was designed to be an immersive experience. The snow, the music, the visual scale of the ice palace sequence, and it loses something when it becomes small. It loses the physical sensation of cold that the film is genuinely capable of producing in a viewer who is fully inside it. Let it be big. Let it fill the room. If you have never owned a film in the physical sense, if streaming has made the idea of owning a specific film feel unnecessary, Frozen is one of the films I would make an exception for, because it is the kind of film that you will return to more than once in different seasons of your own life and find that it means something slightly different each time. The version of this film that speaks to you at 25 is not the version that speaks to you at 35. The film has not changed. You have. And the film will show you what has changed because it is asking the same questions on every viewing and you are bringing different answers each time. Now let me close this box. Frozen is a film about a door, about the distance between two people who love each other and the gap that fear cuts between them, about a girl who spent years being told that who she was needed to be kept hidden, and another girl who spent those same years on the other side of the wall knocking. It is about the moment when love, not romantic love, not the love that arrives in a song with a stranger who finishes your sentences, but the love that turns a sled around in a blizzard and steps in front of a sword finally answers the knock. And the door opens and the winter ends. That is the film. That is what is inside the box. And for all its imperfections, for all the rough edges and the structural fingerprints, and the moments where it felt slightly short of what it was reaching for, it is a film that contains something real. Something about loneliness and love and what it costs to be fully seen by another person and what arrives on the other side of that cost. And films that contain something real, films that say one true thing in the middle of all their spectacle and song, those films deserve to be opened carefully, to be felt fully, to be given the time and the attention they earned. Every film is a box, and we open this one together. Now, before I let you go, if this breakdown gave you something new to think about, if it changed even one frame of how you see this film, please hit the like button and make sure you are subscribed to the Film Box. Every subscriber tells the algorithm that this kind of deep, honest, layered film analysis is worth surfacing, and that means more people get to find it and more boxes get opened. So if you believe in this kind of film conversation, hit subscribe. It takes 1 second and it genuinely matters. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Here is the question I'm leaving you with today. And I want you to actually think about it before you answer. Which moment in Frozen hit you the hardest? And was it the same moment on your first watch as it is now? Because I suspect that for a lot of you, the answer to that question will surprise you. What changed? What moment carries more weight now than it did the first time? Tell me, I want to know. In the next video on the Film Box, we are cracking open a film that arrived quietly, was misunderstood on release, and has since been re-evaluated as one of the most emotionally complex pieces of cinema of its decade. A film with a surface and a depth that are almost entirely different stories. A film that will reward the same kind of patient, careful attention we gave to Frozen today. You will not want to miss it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being the kind of person who wants more from a film than a plot summary. Thank you for sitting still long enough to let a story open properly. That is what this channel is built for. You. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.